Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's meeting for the Rotary E-Club of Silicon Valley. My name is Tzviatko Shidorov, and I am the president-elect for this Rotary Club. And every week, we bring to you an exciting new program related to our focus areas of innovation, entrepreneurship, and education. And this week, we have an exciting speaker all the way from Malawi. Who we have with us today is Johann. And
Hi.
he moved from South Africa to Malawi about 20 years ago with his family, and he'll be telling us about farmers and the work that he's done to ensure that that smallholder subsistence farmers can improve their yields. So very exciting program we have for you today, and I'll hand it over to you, Johann.
Thank you so much. What a privilege to speak to people at Rotary. I think I've seen Rotary doing great work. I haven't been involved with Rotary much, but I've seen several projects here in Africa also sponsored and supported by the Rotary clubs from all over the world. So it's a privilege for me to speak to you today. We had quite an amazing journey the last 20 years. I grew up in South Africa, in the very dry part of the country, in the northwestern Cape, just south of Namibia. Our average rainfall is about 100 millimeters in a year. It's just maybe an inch or so, and it's difficult to a few inches, to imagine what I felt like when I visited Malawi the first time. This was in October 1989, and I remember it very vividly. I had my birthday here, and it was so lush and so green. I haven't traveled much in the world by that time, so it was one of the first Central African countries I've ever visited, and it really looked like paradise to me, coming from a semi-desert area where I grew up. And I just thought, wow, what a beauty. And the people, the culture here, the people are so friendly. It's truly the warm heart of Africa. You greet people and they engage with you. There's always a lot of humor and laughter, and hospitality is just amazing. If you go and visit somebody, I remember we would visit some people in the rural areas, and you go and they bring the little chairs out, you sit outside of the home, and you start talking. Everybody comes, kneels down, greet you by hand, and the children and the women come through, and then you would sit with the husband of the family, and you start talking. But you can never leave the home without eating something. You would know after a while, you realize, okay, now the lady of the house has gone in behind. She started preparing a meal. And the little boy has been sent off to the closest little shop, maybe to buy you some pop or whatever. In their poverty, the people here are amazingly hospitable. And it was really, it touched my heart to see this, what we call in Africa or in South Africa, Ubuntu, this community of such hospitable people. That year when I came, there was still war in Mozambique. It was this long, grueling civil war in Mozambique. Now, if you look at the map of Malawi, Malawi is surrounded by Mozambique, literally, the southern part of it. And Malawi took in millions of refugees, literally. As we drove down the one road that was adjacent to Mozambique, we found refugee camps after the other, just millions of refugees, literally stretches and stretches and stretches of refugee camps in '89. And we entered some of those refugee camps, and the conditions were not great. They were living in thatched grass shelters and so on. But because the war was extended for so long, many of these Mozambicans actually settled in Malawi, and they intermarried and so on. And Malawi's got a great history that it's never had a war. And they took in all these refugees. And today, There's peace in Mozambique. People are returning back to the country, and they're starting to farm there. And even now, in Malawi, 80% of the population are still involved in subsistence farming. So when we eventually moved to Malawi in 1999, we started working with orphans and widows. The HIV/AIDS endemic was rampant in this country, and at that time I think there were 10 million people, the population in Malawi in that time, and of that 10 million, 1 million were orphans. So it was rampant. You found so many people taking care of extended families. I don't think in that time you could find any family that hasn't taken in a cousin or some of the extended family members. And we started off at the children's home, where we received these children through social welfare, and we started caring for them and schooling them, and we built structures. We found an old military base that was evacuated, and we built that up into an orphanage. We worked with an American couple who started the work from Tulsa, Oklahoma, and we farmed the land. We had 34 hectares. And then in 2002, the numbers of orphans we were taking in increased quite a lot, very fast. We started off with 18 children, and we ended up with 130 living on the property. And we had the challenge of feeding them and taking care of them. So we had to use the land. I didn't know much about farming. It wasn't my professional background. So, but we started farming, and we hired people from around in the villages who knew how to farm, and the yields were very low. And then in 2002, we had this tremendous drought where there was such a famine that people died of hunger in this nation. And Rieta, my wife, and me, we just felt touched by this. I mean, we in this new millennium, modern age, and people dying of hunger in a country that's, that seems to be so rich and lush and with good soils and so on. It was just unimaginable for us, and we felt prompted that we cannot sit still and just be onlookers to the suffering. Because whenever we would go to the guardians of these children who we took in, we would find back home severe poverty in such a way that people would grow food, mostly corn, that's their staple food here, and within several months, then the corn will run out. And this is their only livelihood. So they would stack the corn in bags in their storeroom, and they just use it. They take it to a mill it into a flour, and then they cook the flour into a stiff porridge, and they would eat that with some relish. But in August, they would harvest in April, and then in August or so, they run out of food. And then people are desperate. It becomes so bad that in January and February, many families would eat one meal, maybe in 2 days. And we saw on our land in 2002, we were still harvesting quite a lot because we were applying now different agricultural methods. So the methods that we were applying were not very different. We were using a hoe, a hand implement to farm, and we would just do a few different things. And the things that we learned to do, we actually learned from commercial farmers who came from Zimbabwe. And these were very precious people. They lost their land in that time, their big commercial farms. They were devastated, but they chose to go back and train the people and empower the people who took their land. It was, for us, the most unselfish thing you could do. And I'm gonna try to show you a picture here of Brian Aldreeve. He was in this picture. He was visiting Malawi in those days. And so I'm going to share my screen here. And then, so here, Brian is standing. I don't know. Can you see that, Roger?
Yeah, we can see that.
Great. Okay. So there's a picture of Brian standing with a young man. His name is Joseph Chikopa. And they're standing in a small cornfield. Now, this cornfield was planted in the middle of a village and as a demonstration garden of what corn can look like. This corn is still very young. That's why it's not very tall. It's fenced in because there are goats and chickens all around. So to protect the corn against those animals, and everybody passes by there, see this, and it's been watered by hand. It's just 6 meters by 6 meters. And Brian was the one who actually taught us and his team how to grow maize in this way that you could actually triple your yields without having more input costs. And he called it farming God's way, because he said, if we go into nature, I'm going to stop sharing here now, and you walk around in the bush, you see that the soil is always covered with organic matter. You don't see the soil being plowed. You don't see that it's being burned. I mean, it might be that the lightning might strike and there could be a felt fire, but it's rare that it happens in Malawi. I've actually never heard of lightning actually setting the bush on fire. It's a subtropical climate and things don't burn that easy here. There's always moisture. And we started to apply what Brian was teaching us. And he was basically saying, why don't we just look at nature and copy that? Because he has done it on his own farm in the days before he lost his land. He started with 2 hectares. He planted some wheat, and after he planted the wheat as a winter crop, they harvested it, they left the stover on the land, and then they dug little planting stations indents with a hand implement, with a hoe. They call it a badza in Zimbabwe. And he fertilized that, and then he planted the seeds on top of the fertilizer. And they planted it right in the wheat straw, so you couldn't see the soil. The straw was covering the land, and then the maize or the corn germinated through this wonderful organic blanket. And when the rain came, it all saturated right into the ground, and it didn't run off the land. Now, the big problem they had before was there was so much runoff. There was soil erosion, sheet erosion, and the seeds would even wash out of the land. So he came with a team, and they shared all these amazing things with us. And at the children's home, we started implementing them. And I remember the first year when we tried it, we were usually harvesting 50 kg bags from this field. And we stopped plowing the land. So we were not plowing because we were using hand implements, but people plow here by hand, actually. They dig the soil and they make big ridges. They turn the soil upside down. They burn the stover. They clean the land because they want it to be very clean and beautiful. And then they would plant on top of the ridges. We did the opposite. We didn't dig the land at all. We left the previous stover on the land, so we covered the land with an organic blanket. We made small indents in the soil. We applied fertilizer, and we waited for the rain and planted our seeds. And we had a very specific plant population we were aiming for. So there were 4 principles. We do things on high standards, without wastage, on time, and with joy. And so we planted, and we aimed for 44,444 plants per hectare. And we were able to do that plant population using string as measurements to put our maize in straight lines and at the right spacing. And our yield increased from 40 bags to 120 bags the first season. And it astounded us. We said, wow, well, we didn't use anything different than what the ordinary people in the village are using. We're using hose, hand labor, and it's all the same. We didn't introduce anything different. We just changed the methodology. We left the stover on the land. We stopped disturbing the soil. We started to do least soil disturbance and so on, mulching and high standards, good plant populations, and of course getting good seed. And we saw a tripling of our yields. And I'm glad to tell you today that the same children's home, so many years later, are still practicing the same methods. And I visited there the other day, and the farm manager, a young man there, he was very proud. He said, come and see. And he opened the window towards the storeroom, and it was stacked with corn up to the roof. And this was already at the end of the dry season. This is the time when everybody was already running out of food. And the orphanage still had stacks of maize. They could actually sell it off and make money with that. And the next harvest was just 2 months further down the line. And I saw the same principles were still applied on the land. And it's amazing. So we were there for 8 years at that children's home. And we saw such amazing results that we started training the people around us in the communities, mostly young people. And they had similar results. They saw the tripling of their yields using hand implements, no tractors. And then we said, well, if this could happen on this scale, why can't it happen nationwide? And then we could triple a national yield of Malawi. Wouldn't that be awesome? And nobody would be hungry anymore. So we got very excited about this, and we started to feel we want to make this our life mission. This is what we want to do. We want to get involved with subsistence farmers all over this nation and teach them this very simple technology. And so in order to do that, I mean, to take care of 130 kids, I'm telling you, is a difficult job. And it takes every bit of energy and time that you have in you. So we had to wean ourselves off from that work, and we started our own training center a bit closer to Blantyre, the city here in the southern parts of Malawi. So this is where we've been training now for the last 8 years or so. We've been training subsistence farmers at a training center, and our focus is training of trainers. Yeah, so maybe I can show you a few more pictures of people we've been training, which would interest you. So here you see, this is on our property, and you see the straight lines. Now this was accomplished by hand. And the only way you could do that is if you use ropes. So we would have a planting rope with specific markers on the rope. And then we would dig these planting stations. And people take pride in this beautiful standard. And then we would mulch the land. We will carry in the previous stover or leaves and grasses and apply it. And then we would wait for the rain. And then, of course, what we did then, after a few years, we stopped using chemical fertilizers. We learned how to make compost manure, and we started to make compost. And we stopped the chemicals. So for the last 6 years, we haven't applied any chemicals on this land. And our yields have increased year after year after year. And now our average yield is 8 tons per hectare. And the average yield of Malawi is between 1 and 2 tons using chemical fertilizers. So this is so exciting, and actually there's now people that's been trained by us from the Blantyre City Assembly. They're doing composting on a commercial scale. The skips from the marketplaces are coming, dumping organic waste at certain places, and they are turning it into beautiful compost that's being sold. There's just a lot of interest now coming from all over the place in the composting. And all of the farmers that we are training, I'm going to just show you. Must stop me if I need to give you time for questions, but I want to show you just a few more pictures here. Sorry. Let's get another one up here. Screen. Okay. This is a proud farmer. I hope you can see that. And look at the corn. He is so proud of his crop. He's been trained. His land is being mulched. He's applied compost manure, and he's having a beautiful crop. And he will not be hungry. He is gonna have food throughout the year. And he's just from a village called Chiwaya, just across the road here from us. And yeah, it's just exciting. I can show you some of the pictures. Look at these cabbages and the vegetables we're growing on compost. The growth is just so tremendous, and we're just loving this. And it's costing us nothing. I mean, we're using waste material to create this compost. Here's a picture of where we're demonstrating the compost piles we've been making, talking a little bit to the community about compost. In the background, you see a soya field, soya beans being grown, also organically. Yeah, look at this beautiful crop. In the background, you see our cheese factory. We actually started the cheese factory because there's a lot of dairy farmers around us. There's some of our cheese, and we buy milk from dairy farmers. Here we are in a community. Oh, that's a bit small. And training farmers. This is how we dig the hole. So we have a mulched field, and then we dig the holes in specific spacing. We apply the compost in the hole, and we plant right on top of that. Yeah. So maybe we should have some time to ask questions.
This is very, very cool, Johann. Wow, what a wonderful story, and the impact that you've had from, you know, tripling the yields in just one planting season, just by changing a few things here and there and following some proven best practices. Really amazing. So thanks for all the great work that you've done over there. I'd like to introduce the other members of our club that are on the call over here. So we have Roger Plested, who is from Kamloops, British Columbia in Canada. He's the chair of our programs committee. So thank you, Roger, for your leadership there. And we also have our charter president, Rushton Hurley, on the call as well from the Silicon Valley. Hi, Rushton. All right, so I think we have a few minutes here for some questions. I have a couple myself, but let's go to Rushton first. Rushton, go ahead.
So very cool stuff, Johann. Thank you so much for the presentation. Now, you know, you were talking initially about the incredible hospitality of the people in Malawi. Mm-hmm. Is part of the success of sharing these ideas a function of the willingness people have to talk to each other? I mean, did like that thing of let's sit down and talk, let's eat a meal together. Is that part of the reason that it's been successful, do you think?
Well, maybe I've created a wrong picture. It's not easy. The adoption rate has been very hard. But because we've been here 20 years, that makes a difference. Short-term projects would not work. It doesn't work. We've seen so many NGOs coming in, you know, with a flash in the pan, and it all looks great. But you go there a year or what later, and there's nothing happening. So the longevity, the constant building, you know, sort of, you need to create a swelling in the nation, and you need to approach communities, not individuals, because the African culture is community based. So if I approach an individual and I would train him, he would go back and he might have amazing results, but you find within 2 years he doesn't do it anymore. Even though he's tripled his yields, he will fall back in his old ways. But if you go and you approach a community and you involve the village, the traditional authorities like the village heads, the chiefs, and you sell the whole concept to them, and it's all relational. You have to build relationships. You have to be patient. You have to just go there and do a lot of follow-up. Then the people tend to, you see transformation happening in a community. And we had to learn these things through many years. And then you could see, people adapting around some of these lead farmers that's really successful. But it does not come easy. The thing is, people don't want to stand out. Everybody should be the same. If we're all poor and we all suffer together, we're happy, that's fine. But if one person stands out and he starts to harvest 3 times, 4 times as much as the rest, then jealousy creeps in. There's this jealousy factor in Africa that's hard for us to understand. And then the person can actually be ridiculed and even castigated. We've had bad things happening. So people don't want to be different. They want to be part of everybody else. And for instance, if there's a funeral in a community, everybody goes. Everything stops. The whole community goes to the funeral. And they would sit there for a whole day and through the night sometimes, mourning with the people. It's frustrating for people who employ others because there's funerals all the time. But if you understand the community living, it's a unit. You all do it together. So the individual approach doesn't work. You have to tackle the entire community and get everybody on board. Now, one of the tools we've used to do that is we created a film. We shot a film in Malawi. We're not professional filmmakers, but we did it and it works. So it's in Chichewa with English subtitles, and we use this as a training tool. So I would go into a community, we will engage with the village head, and he would invite us. And then the entire community comes. We put a big screen on our old Land Rover, and we show this movie outside, and everybody's there. The kids, there's always more children than adults. They're sitting right in front. It's a sea of people with big loud speakers, and everybody looks at this, and they never see movies of themselves, so they start laughing and screaming and engaging. When you don't watch the movie, you watch the people, because it's a drama, and they just get into it. I mean, there's one scene in this movie, because this is the reality, people are hungry, they go and steal corn from others. So this thief came and he stole corn from the field, and he gets caught and he gets beaten up. You should see the crowd going, yes, beat him. It's just amazing. And then, there's always a lot of humor. You must include humor. That's just how the culture is. And using that film, it's like you speaking their cultural language and the vernacular. It's their own people sharing the message. And then out of that, we start training events, which then is much more successful than you just pulling somebody out. But now our focus is much more on identifying key people in the community. We don't go out anymore. We bring them into our training center. We take them through a 6 weeks intensive training where they live with us, they stay with us, they see the morals, they see the standards, they get inspired, they really get well equipped, they get all the training material, and then they go back and they engage with their community. And we found, since we've changed that strategy of training of trainers, that things are working much better. We see much more application and multiplication now.
Thanks, Johann.
Yes, Roger.
So we will have to wrap things up here in a couple of minutes. But Roger, if you just have a quick comment or a quick question, go ahead, and then we'll wrap things up for the recording.
The method that you've been using reminds me of what's called in Canada and in the United States the root stout method of gardening. Which is a hybrid of that is the back to Eden method of gardening.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And
Yes.
and it works very, very, very well, because what happens is with both methods, you are growing your topsoil.
Yes, absolutely.
Your chemical fertilizers, the problem with them is that they leach through so quickly. They don't add to your topsoil.
Yeah.
But by your composting and the following
Mulching.
what you've been doing, the mulching adds to that topsoil, and that topsoil then in the mulch lasts in the soil for something like 3 or 4 years, which
Absolutely.
really adds to the growth. And I really am happy that that you've given your presentation, because this has been such an important topic. And anything that can be done to help feed people is marvelous.
Yeah, for sure.
Thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Roger.
Thanks, Johann, again for your great presentation. I'll turn it back to you in just a moment here for some final thoughts. But for all of our members and guests who have visited us this week, thank you. We hope you found this presentation inspiring and interesting. Please make sure you tell us you're here, fill out the attendance survey just below, and also leave us a comment or a question in the comment section at the bottom of this page. Let us know what you like. If you have a question for Johann, feel free to leave that in there as well. So with that, I'll turn it back to Johann for some final comments.
Thank you. Yeah, I think this journey we were on, what we see is a growing compassion for the people here. Africa is truly a beautiful continent. The more we live here, the longer we are exposed to the culture and the people, the more we understand this. There's a lot of things people in the West don't understand about Africa, but if you come and see the like I said, the hospitality and the heart of the people, it's really truly something we can learn in the West. We could learn about community living, and I feel very, very privileged in what we're doing. If I get a farmer from a village on my property, I treat him like a king. I make him feel important. And nobody does that, because if you walk with a hoe on your shoulder, you are seen as a poor and uneducated person, and nobody's interested in that anymore. There's low yields, there's very little return for your hard work. So the youth has lost interest in farming. We hope that we can inspire the youth and get them back into this interest, because for the development of Malawi, we need to first learn to go through the agricultural phase of development, which we haven't gone through yet. And that's the backbone of every African country, is agriculture. And people tend to run away from it. We cannot jump the ladder. So we need to come back, and we need to get the youth involved. So we get a lot of young people coming now for educational visits from the universities and from private schools and so forth. And they come for an educational visit, and we make a compost pile together. It's like, environmental health students or biological students at universities. And for the first time, they see the stuff they're learning can actually benefit their own people. And they see the compost heating up, they see the fungi growing, and they can feel it, they can touch it, they can do it. And they go back, and the professors who've been bringing their students here said so many times, wow, Johann, I don't know what you've done, but since my students have been there, they are just buzzing. They want to learn more, and they're excited. And I think it's great for us to bring the joy of learning and discovering of creation back to the people. Many times I find myself explaining something for the first time. I'm the privileged person to explain a concept to a student for the first time in their lives. They understand that. I feel that is a huge privilege. And that's the privilege of working in developing countries. You are pioneering most of the time. And I see this as a great privilege, and our love for the people and our compassion for them are just growing. And I think this is the driving force why we are still here. I mean, it's not easy to be living in these circumstances, but this is the thing that keeps us going, is the love you sense for these precious people. And to see somebody coming out of poverty, there's nothing like it. That's the thing that gives us a kick. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thanks, Johann. Thanks so much for your work.